Before the rain began to fall harder, before the last car in the restaurant parking lot pulled away and left her standing alone, a woman 8 months pregnant heard 5 words that would echo in her mind for years to come. You were never one of us. The voice belonged to her mother-in-law, a woman who had smiled at the wedding, kissed her cheeks at family dinners, and never once meant any of it. But the next sentence was worse. And neither will that child. The mother-in-law stepped into the waiting black sedan without looking back. The door closed. The engine purred. The taillights disappeared into the October evening like 2 red eyes blinking shut. And Seren Maddox stood on the wet pavement in a thin ivory dress, watching the only family she had left abandon her in a restaurant parking lot 7 miles from anywhere she recognized. 30 feet away, in a car that had been idling near the service entrance, a man who had spent his entire life solving problems for the Maddox family slowly lowered his phone from his ear. Because men like him had seen cruelty before, but not like this. Not from her. Even Dante Sava, who feared nothing, felt something cold move through his chest. The restaurant was called Belle Croix. It sat on a hill at the edge of Carrington County, a stone building with ivy crawling up its eastern wall and a reputation for serving people who did not wait for tables. The parking lot was gravel, carefully raked, bordered by trimmed hedges and wrought iron lampposts that glowed amber in the dusk. The kind of place where valet attendants remembered your name, and the wine list had no prices because if you had to ask, you did not belong. Tonight the valets had gone home. The kitchen lights had dimmed. The last of the evening staff had slipped out through the service entrance 20 minutes ago, leaving behind the smell of rosemary and char and something sweet that still lingered in the cooling air. It had been a private dinner, invitation only. Seren had received the text from Renata Maddox at 4 in the afternoon. A car will collect you at 6. Wear something appropriate. We need to discuss arrangements for the baby. Seren had thought it was an olive branch. After months of coldness, months of whispered comments and sidelong glances, she had allowed herself to believe that the arrival of a grandchild might soften the woman who had never accepted her. She had been wrong. The sky above Belle Croix was the color of wet slate. The rain came in waves, light at first, then heavier, then light again, as if the weather itself could not decide how cruel to be. The gravel darkened beneath Seren's shoes. Her dress, a silk thing she had borrowed from her own closet because nothing else fit anymore, clung to her shoulders and her swollen belly. There were no cabs here, no buses, no sidewalks leading anywhere useful. The road curved down the hill and disappeared into a stretch of old-growth trees that looked black against the fading sky. Seren had no umbrella, no coat, no phone, because she had left it charging in the bedroom that morning, thinking she would only be gone a few hours. And no one knew she was here. Seren Maddox was 26 years old. She had auburn hair that fell past her shoulders when it was dry, though now it hung in wet ropes against her neck. Her eyes were the kind of green that changed with the light, bright in the sun, darker in shadow, and right now they held the particular stillness of a woman who was trying very hard not to fall apart. She was 8 months pregnant, 34 weeks to be exact. The doctors had told her to rest, to avoid stress, to keep her blood pressure down because there had been complications early on, a scare at 22 weeks that had put her on bed rest for a month. She had followed every instruction. She had eaten carefully, slept on her left side, taken the vitamins, drunk the water, and done everything right. And now she was standing in the rain outside an empty restaurant with no way home, and a pain beginning to build in her lower back that she was trying very hard to ignore. She did not know where her husband was. Corin Maddox had left for Rome 6 days ago. Business, he had said. He always said business. And Seren had learned in the 2 years of their marriage not to ask questions about the kind of business that required encrypted phones and men who appeared at the door at odd hours. She had married him knowing who he was, knowing what his family did. She had told herself it did not matter because Corin was different. Corin was gentle. Corin brought her coffee in bed and remembered the anniversary of their first date and looked at her sometimes like she was the only real thing in a room full of shadows. But Corin was not here, and his mother had made sure of that. The dinner had started politely enough. Renata Maddox had ordered for both of them. She had asked about the nursery, about names, about whether Seren preferred a day nurse or a night nurse. The questions had seemed normal. The conversation had seemed civil. Then the main course arrived, and Renata had set down her fork and looked at Seren with eyes that held no warmth at all. "I need you to understand something," she had said. "My son made a mistake when he married you. I told him so at the time. He did not listen, but mistakes can be corrected." Seren had frozen. The bite of salmon halfway to her mouth had stopped in midair. "I have arranged for papers to be drawn up," Renata continued. "A generous settlement. Enough for you to live comfortably. You will sign them, and you will leave quietly, and you will not contest custody of the child. The child. Not my grandchild. Not the baby. The child. As if it were an object. A complication to be managed." Seren had put down her fork. She had taken a breath. She had said, in a voice that surprised her with its steadiness, that she would not be signing anything, that she loved Corin, that this was not Renata's decision to make. And Renata had smiled. It was the smile that had frightened Seren most, because it was not the smile of a woman who had been refused. It was the smile of a woman who had already won and was simply waiting for the other person to realize it. "My son will do what I tell him," Renata had said. "He always has. You are a distraction, a temporary lapse in judgment. And when he returns from Rome, he will see things clearly." The check had already been paid. The staff had already been dismissed. And when Seren had stood from the table, her legs unsteady, her heart pounding in her ears, Renata had walked out ahead of her without another word. The sedan had been waiting. Renata had climbed in, and Seren had asked, her voice breaking, how she was supposed to get home. Renata had looked at her through the open window. The rain had just begun to fall. "That," she had said, "is no longer my concern. You were never one of us, and neither will that child." The window had rolled up. The car had pulled away, and Seren had stood there watching it go, one hand pressed against the swell of her belly where the baby had begun to kick, as if it could feel its mother's fear. She had $11 in her clutch. No phone. No coat. No one waiting for her at the bottom of the hill. The rain fell harder, and somewhere deep in her back, beneath her ribs, a new pain pulsed once, then twice, then settled into a rhythm that made her breath catch. 34 weeks. Too early. Far too early. Seren Vashti had not been born into this world. She had grown up in a small town called Aldersfield, 300 miles north of Carrington County, in a house with yellow shutters and a garden her mother tended every spring. Her father had taught high school history. Her mother had worked at the public library. They had eaten dinner together every night at 6:15, and on Sundays they had driven to the coast to watch the waves. It had been a quiet life, a small life, the kind of life that does not prepare you for men like Corin Maddox. She had met him at a gallery opening in the city. She was 23, working as an assistant curator at a small museum that specialized in post-war European art. He had been standing in front of a painting by an artist no one remembered, his hands in his pockets, his head tilted slightly to one side. She had asked him what he saw. He had looked at her and said, "Someone trying to remember what it felt like to hope." That was the sentence that had undone her. They had talked for 2 hours. He had asked her questions no one else asked. About beauty. About loss. About what it meant to preserve something fragile in a world that preferred to destroy. He had listened the way people rarely listen, with his whole attention, as if her words were worth more than anything else in the room. He had not told her who he was, not that night, Not for weeks. By the time she learned the name Maddox, by the time she understood what it meant in certain circles, she was already in love with him. And love, she had discovered, makes you believe you can survive things that would otherwise be unbearable. They had married 14 months later. A small ceremony. His family had attended, though his mother's smile had never reached her eyes. Seren had told herself it was nerves. She had told herself Renata would warm to her in time. She had been telling herself that for 2 years. The isolation had come slowly, so slowly that Seren had not recognized it until it was complete. First, it was the apartment. Corin had insisted they move into the family compound, a sprawling estate 40 minutes outside the city. For safety, he had said. For privacy. Seren had agreed because she trusted him, and because the estate had a library with floor-to-ceiling windows that made her feel like she was living inside a painting. Then it was the job. The museum had offered her a promotion, a curatorial position with her own exhibitions. Corin had asked her to wait. Just a year. Just until things settled down. There were complications with the business. People watching. It was better if she stayed close to home. She had waited. The year had become 2. Then it was her friends. They stopped calling, or she stopped answering, or the distance grew too wide to cross. Her college roommate had visited once, and Renata had been so cold, so pointed in her questions, that the visit had ended a day early, and the roommate had never come back. Then it was her parents. Her father had died of a heart attack 18 months ago. Seren had been at the funeral, standing between her mother and her husband, and she had felt like a stranger in her own grief. Her mother had moved to a care facility in Aldersfield 3 months later. Early onset dementia. The doctors said it would progress slowly, then quickly, then not at all. Seren called her every Sunday. Her mother remembered her about half the time. Corin had held her through the worst of it. He had been tender. He had been present. And Seren had told herself that this was enough, that his kindness in the darkness made up for the light she had lost. But Corin was not here now. He was in Rome, doing whatever men like him did in cities far from home. And his mother had waited for him to leave before she made her move. That was the part that cut deepest. Not the cruelty itself, but the calculation behind it. Renata had planned this. She had waited for the precise moment when Seren would be most vulnerable, most alone, most unable to fight back. And Seren, standing in the rain with her back beginning to spasm and her baby beginning to shift, understood for the first time that she had been a fool. She had believed that love was a shield, that Corin's devotion would protect her from the world he came from, that she could exist in the Maddox family without becoming either a Maddox or a target. She had been wrong about all of it. The rain plastered her hair to her face. Her shoes, delicate things meant for restaurant floors, had soaked through completely. The pain in her back pulsed again, stronger now, and she pressed both hands against her belly and whispered the only prayer she could remember. Please, not yet, please. The baby kicked once, hard, as if answering. And Seren began to walk. Dante Sava had worked for the Maddox family for 19 years. He had started as a driver when he was 22, running errands for Corin's father, a man named Alistair who had built the organization from nothing and ruled it with a patience that most people mistook for mercy. Dante had learned quickly that patience and mercy were not the same thing. He had learned what happened to men who confused them. By the time Alistair died, Dante had become something more than a driver. He was a fixer, a solver of problems, a man who knew how to make complications disappear without leaving traces. He had no official title, no business card, and no entry in any company directory. He existed in the spaces between, and he preferred it that way. He was 41 years old. His hair was dark and cut close to his skull. His face had the weathered look of a man who had spent too many nights in cars and not enough mornings in beds. His eyes were brown, almost black, and they had a quality that made people uncomfortable, not because they were cruel, but because they saw too much. He had never married. He had no children. He had a sister in Barrington who sent him Christmas cards, and a nephew he had met exactly twice. His life was the work. The work was his life. And he had told himself for 19 years that this was enough. But Dante had not always been this. Once he had been a boy named Dante Sava, who lived in a 3-room apartment in the Velmore district, the part of the city where the streetlights flickered and the landlords never fixed the heat. His mother's name had been Ilinka. She had come from the old country with nothing but a suitcase and a phrase book, and a belief that America would be kinder than the place she had fled. America had not been kinder. His father had worked at a meatpacking plant until his back gave out. After that, he had worked at a bottle. And after that, he had worked at making sure everyone in the apartment knew exactly how much he had lost. Dante remembered the sound of his mother's voice through the thin walls at night. The way she whispered please in a language his father did not understand. The way she moved through the kitchen in the mornings with her sleeves pulled down to her wrists, even when the radiator was working. He remembered the day she had told him she was pregnant. He was 14. She had held his hands and smiled and said that this time things would be different. That his father had promised, that a new baby meant a new start. The baby had been a girl. She had lived for 3 days. His mother had lived for 2 weeks after that. The doctors had said complications. Dante had known better. He had known that some women simply ran out of reasons to keep breathing. His father had disappeared 6 months later. Dante had not looked for him. He had not needed to. Men like that always found their way to the same ending, alone in a room somewhere, with nothing but the wreckage they had made. Dante had joined the Maddox organization because it was the only door that opened. He had stayed because he was good at the work, and because the work kept him too busy to remember. But sitting in his car at the edge of the Bellecroix parking lot, watching Seren Maddox stand alone in the rain, watching her press her hands against her belly the way his mother had once pressed her hands against hers, Dante remembered everything. He remembered Ilinka's voice. He remembered her sleeves. He remembered the 3 days his sister had been alive, and the silence that had followed. And he remembered the thing he had promised himself when he was 15 years old, standing at his mother's grave with no one beside him and nothing in his pockets. If he ever had the power to stop it, he would not look away. Renata Maddox had been his employer for 19 years. He had driven her to meetings. He had solved her problems. He had never once questioned her decisions because questioning was not what he was paid to do. But this was not a decision. This was cruelty. And cruelty, Dante had learned, was a door that only opened one way. He watched Seren begin to walk. Her steps were unsteady. Her hand kept moving to her lower back. The rain had soaked through her dress completely, and the thin fabric clung to her body in a way that made her look smaller than she was. She was walking toward the road, toward the trees, toward 7 miles of nothing in the dark. Dante reached for his keys. Seren heard the car before she saw it. The engine was quiet, the kind of quiet that expensive cars cultivated, but in the silence of the empty parking lot, it sounded like thunder. She turned, her heart seizing in her chest, and saw headlights approaching slowly from the direction of the service entrance. Her first thought was Renata. Renata had come back. Renata had changed her mind, not out of kindness, but because leaving a pregnant woman in the rain was the kind of thing that could become a problem if the wrong people heard about it. Her second thought was worse. What if it was someone else? What if Renata had sent someone to make sure she did not come back at all? The car stopped 10 feet away. The headlights stayed on. Seren could not see the driver through the glare. She took a step backward, then another. Her heel caught on the edge of the gravel and she stumbled, catching herself with one hand against her knee, the other wrapped around her belly. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out. He was tall, with dark hair and a face she did not recognize. He was wearing a black coat over a dark shirt, and his hands, she noticed immediately, were visible at his sides, open, empty. He did not move toward her. "Mrs. Maddox," he said. His voice was low, controlled, the kind of voice that had learned not to startle. "My name is Dante Sava. I work for your husband." Seren did not relax. Working for her husband could mean anything. It could mean he was here to help. It could mean he was here to finish what Renata had started. "I don't know you," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "No," he agreed. "You wouldn't. I'm not the kind of man who gets introduced at dinner parties." "What do you want?" "I want to drive you somewhere warm and dry, somewhere with a phone, somewhere that isn't 7 miles of unlit road in a rainstorm." Seren studied his face. She had learned, in her 2 years among the Maddoxes, to read men the way other women read books. To look for the small tells that separated the dangerous from the merely frightening. This man was dangerous. She could see it in the stillness of his posture, in the economy of his movements, in the way his eyes tracked her without seeming to move. He was the kind of man who solved problems, and she had seen enough of those men to know what that meant. But there was something else in his face, something she could not name, a tension around his eyes that did not match the calm of his voice. "Did she send you?" Seren asked. "No." "Then why are you here?" Dante was quiet for a moment. The rain fell between them, pattering against the gravel, running down the collar of his coat. "I was here when she left you," he said finally. "I saw what happened. I heard what she said. And? And I'm not willing to drive away and pretend I didn't." Seren's breath caught. It was such a simple sentence, such an ordinary thing to say. But in the world she had been living in, a world of silences and secrets and looks that meant more than words, it was the most extraordinary thing she had heard in months. "I don't know if I can trust you," she said. "You can't," Dante said. "You don't know me. You have no reason to believe anything I say. I could be lying. I could be working for her. I could be the worst decision you've ever made." He paused. "But you're standing in the rain, 8 months pregnant, with no phone and no coat and no way home. And I'm offering you a choice, not a rescue. A choice. You can get in the car, and I'll take you wherever you want to go. Or you can keep walking, and I'll drive behind you at a distance until you reach somewhere safe, and I won't say another word." Seren stared at him. "Why?" she asked. "Why do you care what happens to me?" Dante looked at her for a long moment. The rain ran down his face, but he did not wipe it away. "Because I watched someone else walk into the dark once," he said, "and I didn't follow. And I've spent 26 years wishing I had." The silence that followed was the kind that tells you something true has been spoken. Not performed, not calculated, but pulled from a place that does not open easily. Seren looked at the car. She looked at the road. She looked at the man standing in the rain with his hands open at his sides. And she made a choice. "The hospital," she said quietly. "I need to go to the hospital. Something's wrong." Dante's expression did not change, but something in his posture tightened almost imperceptibly. "Get in," he said. "Now." The hospital was called St. Meridian. It sat on the eastern edge of the city, a sprawling complex of white buildings and glass atriums that glowed against the night sky like a small city unto itself. Dante had driven fast but steady, taking the curves of the hill road with a precision that suggested he had done this before, driven someone somewhere urgent, driven someone away from something worse. Seren had not spoken during the ride. She had pressed her hands against her belly and focused on breathing, counting the seconds between contractions, trying to convince herself that what she was feeling was not what she thought it was. But her body knew. Her body had known since the parking lot. At the emergency entrance, Dante had pulled to the curb and been out of the car before Seren could reach for the door handle. He had helped her out, one hand on her elbow, the other hovering near her back without touching, and he had walked beside her through the sliding glass doors without once asking if she wanted him to stay. She had wanted him to stay. She had not known how to say it. The nurses had taken over. There had been a wheelchair, a flurry of questions, a blood pressure cuff that squeezed too tight, and a monitor that beeped too fast. A doctor had appeared, a woman with gray hair and calm hands, and she had looked at the readouts and said the words Seren had been dreading. Preterm labor. 34 weeks. The baby was coming, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. They had given her medication to slow the contractions. They had given her steroids to help the baby's lungs. They had put her in a room with machines that hummed and beeped and tracked every flutter of the life inside her. And Dante Sava had sat in a plastic chair in the corner, silent, watchful, waiting. It was 3 hours before the contractions eased, 3 hours before the doctor returned and said that the immediate crisis had passed, that the baby was stable, that Seren would need to stay for observation, but the delivery might still be days away. 3 hours before Seren finally turned her head and looked at the man who had not left. "You should go," she said. Her voice was hoarse. "You've done enough." Dante did not move. "Is there someone I should call?" he asked. "My husband. But I don't have his number memorized. It was in my phone." "I have his number." Seren closed her eyes. Of course he did. He worked for the family. He probably had everyone's number. "Then call him," she said. "Tell him where I am. Tell him what happened." Dante was quiet for a moment. "And if he asks how you got here? Tell him the truth. The truth will create problems. For you. For him. For me." Seren opened her eyes. She looked at Dante, at the stillness of his face, at the way he sat with his hands folded in his lap like a man who was used to waiting in rooms where he did not belong. "Why did she do it?" Seren asked. The question came out before she could stop it. "Why does she hate me so much?" Dante considered the question. "She doesn't hate you," he said finally. "She fears you." "Fears me? I'm nobody. I have nothing. I came from nothing." "That's exactly why she fears you. Because her son chose you. Not because of your family. Not because of your connections. Not because of anything you could offer him except yourself. And that kind of love, the kind that doesn't need anything, that doesn't want anything, that exists simply because it exists." He paused. "That kind of love is the one thing Renata Maddox cannot control." Seren stared at him. "You've thought about this." "I've watched this family for 19 years. I've seen what they do to people who threaten the order of things. Anyone who got too close, anyone who made Corin feel something that wasn't sanctioned, they were removed. Quietly, efficiently, without anyone ever knowing exactly what had happened. And you helped with that." It was not a question. Dante's expression did not change. "Yes." "Then why are you helping me?" The silence stretched between them. The machines beeped. The rain, still falling outside, tapped against the window like fingers asking to be let in. "Because you remind me of someone," Dante said quietly. "Someone I couldn't help. Someone I've spent half my life trying to forget." Seren waited. "When I was 15, my mother died. She had been pregnant. The baby didn't survive. And my mother, she just stopped. Stopped eating. Stopped sleeping. Stopped wanting to be alive. She had spent years being afraid of my father. Years being told she was nothing. Years believing that the life she was living was the only life she deserved. And when she lost the baby, she lost the last thing she was holding on to." He looked at the floor. "I was a child. I couldn't do anything. I watched her disappear. And I stood there with my hands in my pockets because I didn't know what else to do." He looked up. I'm not a child anymore, and I'm not going to stand with my hands in my pockets while another woman disappears. Seren felt something shift in her chest, a wall she had built without knowing she was building it. I haven't told anyone the full story, she said. Not even Corin. Not really. You don't have to tell me. I know. She took a breath. But I want to. Because you're the first person in 2 years who's looked at me like I'm a person and not a problem. And so she told him. She told him about the gallery, about the way Corin had looked at her that first night like she was the only real thing in the room, about the wedding, the move to the compound, the slow erosion of everything she had been before. She told him about Renata's campaign of small cruelties, the comments about her background, her education, her family, the way Renata rearranged the seating at dinners so Seren was always at the far end of the table, the way she scheduled events when she knew Corin would be away, then criticized Seren for not attending. She told him about the pregnancy, how she had thought it would change things, how she had believed, foolishly, naively, that a grandchild would be the bridge between her and the woman who had never accepted her. She told him about the dinner, the papers, the settlement, the custody demand. And she told him the things she had not admitted to anyone, not even herself. I think Corin knows, she whispered. I think he knows what she's doing. And I think he's too afraid of her to stop it. The words hung in the air. He calls me from Rome, she continued. He tells me he loves me. He asks about the baby. But when I try to tell him about his mother, about what she says to me, about how she treats me, he changes the subject. He says I'm imagining things. He says she's just old-fashioned. He says it will get better. She looked at Dante. But it's not going to get better, is it? Dante held her gaze. No, he said. It's not. The honesty of the answer struck Seren like a physical thing. She had spent 2 years surrounded by people who softened the truth, who wrapped it in silk, and presented it as something other than what it was. To hear someone simply say no, without apology, without equivocation, was almost unbearable. Then what do I do? She asked. Dante leaned forward in his chair. His elbows rested on his knees. His hands hung loosely between them. That depends on what you want. I want my baby to be safe. I want to be safe. I want... She stopped. I want to feel like a person again. Not a possession. Not a problem. A person. Then you need to understand something about the world you married into. In this world, power is the only currency that matters. And right now, you have none. Renata knows that. She's counting on it. She believes you'll sign those papers because you have no other choice. I won't sign them. I know you won't. But refusing isn't enough. You need leverage. You need protection. You need someone in that family who will stand beside you when Renata makes her next move. Corin, your husband loves you. I believe that. But love without courage is just sentiment, and Corin has spent his entire life deferring to his mother. Breaking that pattern will take more than love. It will take proof that the cost of losing you is greater than the cost of defying her. Seren shook her head. I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to fight people like this. Dante was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his phone. When I was 25, he said, I made a decision. I decided that the only way to survive in this world was to become indispensable. To know things that other people didn't, to keep records that no one else kept. I told myself it was insurance, a way to protect myself if things ever went wrong. He looked at the phone. I have 19 years of insurance. Every transaction, every conversation, every decision that Renata Maddox made that she wouldn't want the world to know about. It's not enough to destroy her, but it's enough to make her think twice. It's enough to shift the balance. Seren stared at him. Why would you give that to me? If she finds out, she won't find out. And even if she does, He met her eyes. I told you, I'm done standing with my hands in my pockets. He set the phone on the edge of her hospital bed. I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm not asking you to believe that I'm a good man, because I'm not. I've done things for this family that would make you sick if I told you, but I'm asking you to believe this. What happened to you tonight was wrong, and I'm not going to pretend it wasn't. Seren looked at the phone. She looked at Dante. What do you want in return? Nothing. Everyone wants something. Dante stood. He walked to the window and looked out at the rain. When my mother died, he said quietly, no one came to the funeral except me. No one helped her. No one stood up for her. No one said this is wrong, and I won't let it continue. She died believing that was normal. She died believing she deserved it. He turned. I want you to know you don't deserve it. I want your daughter to grow up knowing that someone, somewhere, decided she was worth protecting. That's what I want. And that's all I want. Seren stayed at St. Meridian for 4 days. The contractions did not return. The baby's heartbeat stayed strong and steady, a rhythm that Seren listened to through the monitor for hours at a time, letting it replace the noise in her head with something simpler, something true. The doctors told her she would need to remain on bed rest for the remainder of her pregnancy. No stress, no exertion, no situations that might raise her blood pressure. She did not mention the dinner. She did not mention Renata. She told the doctors she had been caught in the rain and felt unwell, and they had no reason to doubt her. Dante visited twice. Once to bring her a phone, a prepaid device that could not be traced to any Maddox account. Once to bring her a small bag of clothes, items he had purchased himself from a shop he would not name. He did not stay long either time. He sat in the plastic chair, answered her questions, and left without ceremony. But he also made phone calls, quiet ones, to people whose names he did not share. On the 3rd day, a woman arrived at Seren's hospital room. Her name was Margot Valliere. She was in her 50s, with silver hair cut sharply at the jaw and eyes that missed nothing. She wore a charcoal suit and carried a leather briefcase that looked like it had been to more courtrooms than most judges. Mrs. Maddox, she said, extending her hand. My name is Margot Valliere. I specialize in family law, asset protection, and matters of delicate separation. Seren shook her hand. I didn't call a lawyer. No, but someone did. Margot glanced at the door. A mutual acquaintance suggested you might benefit from a conversation. Dante. He didn't give a name, only a description of your situation. May I sit? Seren nodded. Margot settled into the plastic chair that Dante had occupied and opened her briefcase. Let me be direct, she said. I've dealt with families like the Maddoxes before. Old money, old power, old habits. They believe that their wealth places them above the normal rules of human decency. They are, generally speaking, wrong about that. But convincing them requires a certain precision. I don't have money for a lawyer. You have something better. You have information. And you have a husband who, from what I understand, has not yet been given the opportunity to choose between his mother and his wife. Seren's throat tightened. You think he'll choose me? Margot studied her for a moment. I think that men who grow up under the control of powerful mothers often don't know they have a choice until someone shows them. My job is to create the conditions under which that choice becomes clear. She paused. But I should warn you, if he chooses his mother, you need to be prepared for what comes next. What comes next? A fight. A real one. For your child. For your assets. For your freedom. The kind of fight that these families usually win because the other side doesn't have the resources to compete. Margot closed her briefcase. But you have resources now. You have documentation. You have a witness. And you have me. For the first time in days, Seren felt something other than fear. It was small. It was fragile. It flickered like a candle in a drafty room. But it was hope. On the fourth day, Seren was discharged. The doctors gave her a list of instructions, a follow-up appointment, and a warning to avoid stress. She thanked them without irony. Dante was waiting in the lobby. He did not offer explanations. He did not ask questions. He simply walked beside her to the car and held the door, while she lowered herself carefully into the passenger seat. "Where am I going?" she asked. "Somewhere safe. A place Renata doesn't know about. You'll stay there until we can speak with your husband." "And if Corin doesn't want to speak with me?" Dante started the engine. "Then we make sure he has no choice." The safe house was a cottage on the outskirts of a town called Harrowell, 40 minutes from the city in a direction no Maddox business ever reached. It was small, white-painted, with blue shutters and a garden that had gone to seed. Inside there was a fireplace, a kitchen with a gas stove, a bedroom with a quilt that smelled of lavender, and a bathroom with a clawfoot tub. Seren stood in the doorway and looked at the space. "This is yours?" she asked. "It was my mother's," Dante said. "I kept it. I don't know why. I've never stayed here." Seren walked to the window. The view was of a field, golden in the late afternoon light, bordered by a row of birch trees whose leaves had begun to turn. "There's food in the kitchen," Dante said. "Enough for a week? The phone works. Margot will call you tomorrow to discuss next steps." Seren turned. "Thank you," she said. "I don't know how to—" "Don't." Dante shook his head. "Don't thank me. Just rest. Take care of yourself. Take care of that baby. That's all I need." He walked to the door. His hand rested on the frame. "There's a lock," he said. "A deadbolt on the inside. Use it." And then he was gone. Seren stood in the silence of the cottage. She walked to the door. She looked at the deadbolt, a heavy brass thing with a satisfying weight. She turned it. The sound of the latch sliding home was the loudest, most beautiful sound she had heard in 2 years. She pressed her forehead against the wood and let herself cry. Corin Maddox returned from Rome on a Tuesday. He returned to an empty bedroom, a closet missing half its contents, a wife who had not answered his calls in 6 days. He called his mother first. That was his pattern, the pattern of a lifetime, and Renata had been waiting. She told him that Seren had become unstable, that the pregnancy had affected her mind, that she had made wild accusations at a dinner, stormed out, and disappeared. That she was a danger to herself and possibly to the child. That lawyers had been contacted, that arrangements were being made. Corin listened. He had always listened to his mother. He had been raised to believe that her voice was the voice of reason, that her judgment was infallible, that her love was the purest form of protection. But something nagged at him. Seren had not stormed anywhere in 2 years. Seren did not make scenes. Seren was the calmest person he had ever known, the kind of woman who could sit through 3 hours of Renata's thinly veiled insults and smile and pour more wine and never once lose her composure. He called the hospitals. He called the police. He called friends of hers that he barely remembered because Seren had stopped mentioning them months ago. Nothing. And then, on the second day, his phone rang. It was a number he did not recognize. The voice on the other end was one he did not expect. "Mr. Maddox?" Dante said. "We need to speak." The meeting took place at a coffee shop in Bellemond, a neighborhood Corin had never visited. Dante was already there when he arrived, sitting at a corner table with his back to the wall, a cup of black coffee untouched in front of him. Corin sat down. "Where is my wife?" "Safe." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer you're getting until you hear what I have to say." Corin's jaw tightened. He was not used to being spoken to this way. Not by employees. Not by anyone. But something in Dante's expression made him pause. Talk, Corin said. So Dante talked. He told him about the dinner at Bella Croix, about Renata's ultimatum, about the papers demanding Seren sign away custody of a child that had not yet been born, about the sedan pulling away and leaving a pregnant woman alone in the rain 7 miles from home. Corin's face changed as he listened. The color drained from it. His hands, resting on the table, slowly closed into fists. You're lying, he said, but his voice was hollow. I'm not. And you know I'm not. Because somewhere in your mind, you've always known what your mother is capable of. You just chose not to look. She wouldn't. She did. I was there. I watched it happen. And if I hadn't followed your wife to the hospital, she might have lost your child on the side of a road in the middle of the night. The silence that followed was suffocating. Corin sat motionless, his breath shallow, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere beyond Dante's shoulder. Why are you telling me this? He asked finally. You've worked for my family for almost 20 years. Why turn on her now? I'm not turning on anyone. I'm giving you information. What you do with it is your choice. That's not an answer. Dante considered the question. Because I watched your wife stand in the rain with her hands on her belly, trying to hold your child inside her body through sheer force of will. Because I heard her ask how she was supposed to get home, and I heard your mother say it wasn't her concern. Because I've spent 19 years watching your family treat people like chess pieces, and I'm tired of pretending that's normal. He leaned forward. But mostly because your wife reminds me of someone I loved, someone I couldn't protect. And I'm not going to watch history repeat itself while I sit in a car and do nothing. Corin stared at him. Where is she? That depends. On what? On what kind of man you want to be? The kind who calls his mother and asks for guidance, or the kind who drives to his wife and asks for forgiveness? The question hung in the air. Corin closed his eyes. For a long moment, he did not move. Then he opened them. Take me to her. The drive to Harrowell took 45 minutes. Neither man spoke. The silence was heavy with everything that had been said and everything that had not. When they arrived at the cottage, Corin sat in the passenger seat and looked at the small white building with its blue shutters and its overgrown garden. She's in there? He asked. Yes. Does she know I'm coming? No. Corin nodded slowly. He reached for the door handle, then stopped. I've been a coward, he said quietly. I've known what my mother was for years. I told myself it didn't matter because she loved me, because she was protecting me, because... He trailed off. Because it was easier, Dante finished. Corin looked at him. Yes, it was easier. He opened the door. It won't be easier anymore, I understand that. Good. Corin walked to the cottage. His steps were slow, deliberate, the steps of a man who understood that what waited on the other side of that door would change everything. He knocked. Seren opened the door with her hand on her belly and her heart in her throat. She had heard the car. She had watched through the window. She had seen her husband step out of the passenger side and stand in the garden with his shoulders hunched and his head bowed, looking smaller than she had ever seen him. And for a long moment, she had not known whether to open the door at all. But she had. Corin looked at her. His eyes moved from her face to her belly to her bare feet on the wooden floor. He took in the circles under her eyes, the weight she had lost, and the way she held herself like a woman who was ready to run. Seren, he said. Just her name. Nothing else. How much do you know? She asked. Everything. Dante told me everything. And you believe him? Corin's face crumpled. I believe him because I should have known without being told. I should have seen it. I should have protected you. And I didn't. He took a step closer. Serene did not step back. My mother called me when I landed. She told me you were unstable, that you'd had some kind of breakdown, that you were a danger to the baby. His voice cracked. And for 20 minutes, I believed her. 20 minutes. Because that's what I've always done. Believed her. Seren felt the tears building behind her eyes. What changed? I started asking questions. I called hospitals. I called your friends. And no one had heard from you. No one knew where you were. And I realized that if you were really unstable, if you were really having a breakdown, there would be records. There would be evidence. But there was nothing. Just silence. The kind of silence my mother knows how to create. He reached for her hand. She let him take it. I'm sorry, he said. I'm so sorry. I've spent our entire marriage pretending that her cruelty was something else. Something I could manage. Something that would get better. And I let her hurt you because looking at the truth was too hard. Seren squeezed his hand. I need you to choose, she said. Not today. Not right now. But soon. I need you to choose between your mother and your family. Because I can't raise a child in a house where I'm treated like an enemy. I can't spend the rest of my life waiting for the next attack. Corin nodded. I know. Do you? Because choosing me means losing her. It means losing the approval you've spent your whole life trying to earn. It means becoming someone she'll never forgive. I know, Corin said again, and I'm terrified. But I'm more terrified of losing you, of losing this. He touched her belly gently. I've wanted this my whole life. A family that's mine. A home that feels like home. And I almost let my mother take it from me because I was too afraid to say no. He looked at her. I'm saying no now. I don't know what happens next. I don't know how to fight her. But I know I can't be the man who watches his wife stand in the rain and does nothing. Seren pulled him into the cottage and closed the door. They stood in the small living room with the fireplace and the quilt and the windows that looked out over the golden field. Corin held her, carefully, gently, his arms wrapped around her shoulders, his chin resting on the top of her head. What do we do now? He asked. We wait, Seren said. We let Margot do her work. We let Dante do his. And we get ready. Ready for what? For your mother to find out she's lost. 3 weeks later, Renata Maddox received a phone call from her own lawyer. The conversation lasted 11 minutes. When it ended, she sat in her study with the phone in her lap and a look on her face that her household staff had never seen before. Fear. Margot Valliere had filed a restraining order. She had submitted documentation of emotional abuse, coercive control, and attempted interference with a pregnancy. She had included witness statements, recorded conversations, and 19 years of records that Dante Sava had kept in a safe deposit box no one knew existed. The case would not go to trial. Renata's lawyers made sure of that. But the terms of the settlement were clear. No contact with Seren, no contact with the child, no interference with Corin's decisions regarding his family. Any violation would result in immediate release of the documentation to the press. Renata Maddox, who had spent 40 years building a reputation on power and control, had been outmaneuvered by a woman she had dismissed as nothing. Corin delivered the news himself. He stood in his mother's study with his hands at his sides and his voice steady. You had a choice, he said. You could have welcomed her. You could have loved her. You could have been a grandmother. Instead, you tried to destroy her. Renata's eyes were cold. I was protecting this family. No. You were protecting your control, and you lost both. He turned to leave. If you ever come near my wife or my child, he said at the door, I will release everything. Not because I hate you, but because I love them more than I fear you. He walked out. He did not look back. The baby was born on a Thursday in late November. She arrived 2 weeks early but healthy, screaming her arrival into a delivery room at St. Meridian Hospital with a voice that made the nurses laugh and the doctors smile and Seren cry with a joy she had not known she was capable of feeling. They named her Eleni. It meant light. Corin held her first, his hands trembling, his eyes wet, his voice breaking as he whispered hello to the daughter he had almost lost before she was born. Seren watched him. She watched the way he cradled Eleni against his chest, the way he looked at her, like she was the most miraculous thing he had ever seen. And she knew, in that moment, that she had made the right choice. Not the easy choice, the right one. 6 months later, on a warm afternoon in May, Seren drove to Harrowell. The cottage looked different in the spring. The garden had been tended. The shutters had been repainted. The birch trees along the field were green and full, their leaves catching the sunlight like small coins. She parked in the driveway and lifted Eleni from her car seat. The baby was awake, her green eyes tracking the movement of the leaves, her small hands opening and closing around nothing. Seren walked to the door and knocked. Dante opened it. He looked the same. Dark hair, weathered face, eyes that saw too much. But there was something different in the way he held himself, something lighter. "Mrs. Maddox," he said. "Seren," she corrected. He nodded. "Seren?" She held up Eleni. "I wanted you to meet her." Dante looked at the baby. For a long moment, he did not move. His face was still, controlled, the face of a man who had spent his life hiding what he felt. But his eyes were not still. His eyes were full. "She's beautiful," he said quietly. "She's alive because of you. I'm alive because of you." Dante shook his head. "You're alive because you walked out of that parking lot, because you didn't give up, because you decided your daughter was worth fighting for. You followed me. I followed you." He paused. "But you're the one who kept going." Seren smiled. It was the first real smile she had given anyone in a long time. The kind that reaches the eyes and keeps traveling until it finds somewhere deep in the chest where trust begins to rebuild. "I brought you something," she said. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small frame. Inside was a photograph of Eleni, 2 weeks old, sleeping on a quilt that smelled of lavender. "I thought you might want to know what you helped create." Dante took the frame. He looked at it for a long time. "Thank you," he said finally. His voice was rough. Seren nodded. "Thank you," she said, "for not looking away." She turned and walked back to the car. She buckled Eleni into her seat. She started the engine. As she drove down the long gravel road, she looked in the rearview mirror. Dante was standing in the doorway of the cottage, the frame still in his hands, watching her go. He raised one hand. She raised one back. And then she turned onto the main road and drove toward home. That evening, in a house on the outskirts of the city, a house with a garden and a nursery and a deadbolt on every door, Seren sat in a rocking chair and watched her husband give their daughter a bath. Eleni splashed. Corin laughed. Water went everywhere. Seren watched them, these two people she loved more than anything in the world, and she felt a feeling she had forgotten existed. Safe. Not because the danger was gone. The world was still full of people like Renata. Still full of darkness and cruelty, and things that happened in parking lots on rainy October nights. But Seren was not alone anymore. She had a husband who had chosen her over everything he had been raised to believe. She had a daughter who would never learn that love came with conditions. She had a house with locks on the doors and food in the kitchen, and a future that stretched out in front of her like a road she was finally allowed to walk. She stood up from the rocking chair. She walked to the bathroom door. She watched Corin lift Eleni from the water and wrap her in a towel, his hands gentle, and his face soft with a love that asked for nothing. "Hey," she said. He looked up. "Hey. I love you." He smiled. A real smile, unguarded and whole. "I love you too." Seren looked at her daughter, at her husband, at the small, ordinary, miraculous life they had built from the wreckage of everything that had tried to destroy them. And somewhere, in a cottage in Harrowell, a man who had spent his whole life solving problems for other people sat in a chair by the window and looked at a photograph of a baby he had helped bring into the world. He did not smile. He was not the kind of man who smiled easily. But something in his chest, something that had been closed for 26 years, finally opened. Not all the way, just enough. The sun set over Carrington County, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. The rain had stopped days ago. The leaves had turned. The world had kept moving. And in a house with blue shutters and a garden that someone finally tended, a deadbolt held faithfully in its locked position. Not because the world outside was safe, but because the people inside had decided they were worth protecting. And that, in the end, was enough.